Like everything else, the cost of toys has gone up over the years, but if we factor in inflation, are we actually paying more money for them today than we used to? In this video, I'm going to take a look back at some of the most popular toys in Christmas history and see if the prices that you buy those toys for today is actually that much more than you would have paid back in the day. Now, just in case you aren't aware, when we're talking about adjusting for inflation, we're talking about what a dollar could get you back in the day versus what a dollar could get you today. This is a companion video to last year's best-selling Christmas toys of each year. Now, I tried my very best to find the prices of these toys when they first came out, but believe it or not, people didn't actually keep the best records of how much toys cost back in the 1960s. So as we get further along, it is easier to find more reliable costs of these toys, but I was working with the best numbers I could find. And so if you like these kinds of videos, don't forget to subscribe so you can see when we put out new ones. In 1960, when the Etch-a-Sketch was the #1 Christmas toy, you would have paid $2.99 to get one. Now, if you adjust that with inflation to a $2,025, it's going to be $32.59, which lets us see that the $19.99 you'd pay for a new one today isn't actually all that bad. The next year, in 1961, the Slip and Slide was the most popular Christmas toy, and that year you would have paid $9.95 for one. When you adjust that for inflation, it's equal to $107.79 today. And you can run out today and buy a brand new Slip and Slide for around $25. Do want to do a quick shout out to everybody in the Southern Hemisphere who reminded me that it's not cold everywhere for Christmas. Sorry for forgetting about you in the last video. I wasn't able to find a reliable original price for the Chatter telephone, but I did just want to conclude it here so I didn't have a skipped year. Moving into 1963, the Easy Bake Oven was the popular Christmas toy, and it would cost you $15.95. You adjust that for inflation, you get $167.66. Now, there's a wide variety of types of Easy Bake Ovens, but you can get some for as low as $50 today. Back in 1964, the big doll-sized G.I. Joes were popular. You can get those for between $4 and $5. You adjust that for inflation, though, that's $41.64 to $52.05. Again, there are a lot of different types of G.I. Joes available today, big ones, small ones, but if you're looking for these doll-sized ones, you can get them for around $25. When the Whammo Frisbee was big and popular in 1965, you could get them for around $1. With inflation, though, that's going to be about $10.21, which means that it's about on par with what you would pay today, where you can get a Whammo brand Frisbee for about $9. Chatty Cathy is up next. You can get those in 1965 for $18. Adjusted for inflation, that's $183.85 for this doll. Now, this is the first time we're going to see where there's not actually a current version of Chatty Cathy, at least that I could find. So you can actually get a version of this today. Of course, there are a lot of dolls that do the same thing, but when it comes to the named version, you just can't get them. The board game Operation in 1965 would go for about $10. Adjusted for inflation, that means you're paying $102.14 essentially for this game, which is absolutely crazy to me, especially because you can get a version of it nowadays for just $20. The next year in 1966, Twister was the popular game. You could get this also for that $10. Adjusted for inflation, it's a little bit less at $98.72 because it is a year later, but still a crazy amount of money for a spinner and a piece of plastic. Nowadays, though, you can get Twister for about $14. Similar to the Chatter phone, could not find a reliable price when it comes to the spirographs, so I did not do an adjusted for inflation for this one. Moving to the next year, 1967, the Light Bright was a popular toy. You can get those for about $15. Adjusting that for inflation, you get to $143.72, which is really high considering you can buy a brand new Light Bright this year for about $20. Also in 1967, for $10, you could get the Rock'em Sock'em robots. Adjusting that for inflation, that's $95.81, but nowadays you can go get one for $23. Battleship is going to be at the same price that same year, $10 inflated to $95.81, with Battleship being available today, though, at an even lower price of just $17. Moving into 1968, Hot Wheels were really popular, and you can get those for about 69 cents. If you adjust that for inflation, that gets up to $6.31 a car. Now, there is, of course, a wide variety of prices you could pay for Hot Wheels, but you can get them for as low as about $1.50. That same year, if you were going to buy Monopoly, it would cost you about $5. Adjusting that for inflation, it gets you to $45.75, which is not unheard of for board games nowadays. Though Monopoly itself is a cheaper board game, you can get those for about $15. Back in 1969, if you were going to get all three of the classic basic sets of Lego, it would cost you $9. You adjust that for inflation, $77.54, which again is a price people happily pay for Lego nowadays, but you can get some of those more traditional Lego today, big set of them, for about $25. The board game Mousetrap in 1969 was big. You can get that for $5. Adjusting that for inflation, that'd be $43.08 today. Luckily though, if you're going to go out and buy a brand new Mousetrap, you can get that for $25. The final toy we'll talk about for the 1960s is going to be Astronaut Snoopy. What I could find said that those were originally priced about $5. That would be adjusted for inflation today at $43.08. And even though this specific version of Astronaut Snoopy is not available, there's actually a lot of stuffed Astronaut Snoopies. You can get those starting at around $20. As we move into 1970, the Nerf ball sold for $5. Adjusted for inflation, that little ball would have cost you $40.80. The version in 2025, though, is selling for pretty much that original price, still around $5. The little Weebles that wobble and don't fall down were $5 when they came out in 1971. Adjusting that for inflation, that's $39.51. Today, though, you can get Weebles for pretty close to that original price, just at $6. When Uno was big back in 1972, it would cost you about $2.50 to get a pack of cards. Adjusting that for inflation gets you up to $19.11. Again, not crazy for a board game or a card game, though because it's so popular and such a classic, it is one that sells for less. You can usually find it for close to $7. Boggle's another one of those that I could not find a good original price to work off of, but just keep it on the list because I did feature it on that original video. 1972, you could get a big wheel, and that would cost you about $15, which sounds pretty good until you remember that adjusting for inflation, that's around $114.64, which means that it's actually staying pretty close to that adjusted price nowadays because you can get a big wheel for about $99.99. In 1973, if you're going to get a package of Shrinky Dinks, it would cost you about $2. Adjusting that for inflation, it would get you to $14.06. And then today, if you're going to buy a pack of Shrinky Dinks, again, there's a wide variety, bigger packs, but the one that I think is pretty comparable to that original pack would cost you about $12. 1973 also saw Baby Alive being extremely popular at $17. Adjusting that for inflation, that doll would have cost you about $119.52 today. Though luckily, if you were going to go out and buy today's version of a Baby Alive, it would only cost you about $24. Connect 4 is going to be another one of those that I could not find a reliable price on, but here it is on the list. Now, Pong was really popular in 1974, and it would have cost you $99.95 to get it brand new. Adjusting that for inflation, it's pretty expensive at $625.51, especially considering nowadays you can get Pong, a bunch of different versions of it, for as low as $20. 1975's The Pet Rock is pretty interesting. Back then you could get it for about $4. Adjusting that for inflation gets it all the way up to $23.41, again for a rock. But the crazy thing is that if you were going to go out and buy a brand new one today, you would pay even more than the inflated price. It costs you about $30. Now, skateboards being the most popular toy here is interesting because there are a ton of different versions of skateboards for any kind of price you would want to pay. Now, originally you could get them for $25 all the way up to like $100. Adjusting that for inflation, it's like $139.52 all the way up to $558.08. Nowadays you can get skateboards for around $28, but of course if you want to pay more, you can get any kind of skateboard for as much as you want to pay. 1976 also saw the Stretch Armstrong being popular at $11 a piece. Adjusting that for inflation, that's going to get you up to $61.39. Now, I didn't realize it, but there are still versions of Stretch Armstrong out there today, newer versions of it even, not just like nostalgia throwbacks, and they're only about $19. 1977 saw one of the most expensive gifts we're going to talk about today. With an original price of $200, the Atari 2600 would cost you $1,046.05 if you adjusted for inflation. Now, there isn't a version of this that's exactly the same. They actually have all the games like built in and everything, and you can get them for about $100, even though there are some versions of it that are even cheaper. The electronic football put out by Mattel cost $25 when it first came out, and I didn't realize just how expensive those were because adjusted for inflation, that's about $130.76. You can find some of those out there today, and they're only going to cost you about $60. Star Wars came out in 1977, but the toys didn't actually show up until the next year, 1978. Back then, you could get a little figure for about $2, and if you adjust that for inflation, it gets you up to about $9.60. Now, just like a lot of things, there are a lot of different versions of Star Wars toys. You can pay a lot for them, but you can get toys that are pretty comparable to those original figures for about $10 a piece. Finishing out the 70s, we had the electronic game Simon. That would have cost you $25 back in '79, with the price adjusted for inflation, putting you at $105.87. But nowadays, you can actually go out and buy them for cheaper than they cost back in '79, getting them for about 22 bucks. We kick off the 80s with the Rubik's Cube, originally priced at $2. Adjusting that for inflation gets you up to $7.53. The new versions today cost more than that, usually running at about $11. Strawberry Shortcake is next up in 1981, with the original price being $5 on those. Adjusting that for inflation, that's going to be $17.28, with the version available today out there at $18. So, it's about the same. This one is probably the craziest to me, with the Smurfs figurines, originally priced at about $1 a piece. Adjusting that for inflation, $3.46. Seems pretty reasonable. When I was looking up these things today, it's costing you about $11 a piece for these. Now, you can get packs where there's a bunch of them, and those aren't as much. But if you want to get specific little figures, $11 a piece just seems crazy. My Little Pony has continued to be extremely popular, but back in 1982, you could get ponies from between $5 and $10. Adjusting that for inflation, that's going to get you between $16.64 and $33.28. Today, of course, there's a wide variety, but you can get ponies pretty close to the originals at about $17 a piece. The Glowworm was $5 in 1982. Adjusting that for inflation, it gets you to $16.64. Nowadays, you're paying even more than that, though, with the new version of the Glowworm being $26. He-Man action figures were available in that same year for $5 a piece. Adjusting that for inflation gets you to $16.64, which is pretty close to what you can get them for today, which is about $15 a piece. 1983 saw Cabbage Patch Kids as the huge gift. Those were running about $21 a piece. If you're buying them at a store, of course, if people are scalping them and you're paying out of the back of somebody's trunk of their car, you're probably going to be paying a bit more than that. But if you just take that regular price and adjust that for inflation, that's going to get you to $67.33. Now, if you're going to buy Cabbage Patch Kids today, it is less than that inflated price, being close to $37. In 1984, Transformers were big, and the standard ones were about $5. You can get some of the bigger sets at about $28. Adjusting that for inflation, it's between $15.42 and $86.37. Today, again, there's a wide variety, but close to those original ones is going to be close to $25. In 1985, Teddy Ruxpin was the hot Christmas toy, and he cost $69.99. When you adjust that for inflation, that little bear was costing about $207.98. Now, that might seem like a lot, but if you're going to get a Teddy Ruxpin or something similar to it today, it's going to cost you even more, close to $250. In 1986 at Christmas, the hottest toy was the Nintendo Entertainment System. Now, you could get that back then for about $200 for the basic one. Adjusting that for inflation, that's going to be $587.87. Now, of course, the Nintendo Entertainment System is not available anymore, but the thing that is comparable to that is going to be the Nintendo Switch 2, which is Nintendo's newest system, and that sells for about $500. So not too far off from that inflated price. 1987 saw Jenga be popular. The price on that was $10 a piece. Adjusting that for inflation, it's about $28.15. Nowadays, you can get those for $15. Little Koosh balls were $7 that same year. Adjusting that for inflation is $19.70. You can get those again for about that same original price, $7 today. Moving into that next year, 1988, Trolls dolls were selling for about $5 a piece. Adjusting that for inflation, $13.48. Now, Troll dolls today, there are the traditional ones. There are a lot of different types of ones with the movie coming out and everything, but if you're going for these kind of traditional looking ones, you can get those for about $12. Then we finish out the 1980s with Nintendo's Game Boy. Now, this was originally priced at $89.99. Adjusting that for inflation, it's going to be $231.79. Now, Nintendo does not have a current solo handheld gaming console, and so we're just going to have to compare that again to the Switch 2 at $500. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles were the big toy in 1990. Those were selling for about $5 a piece. Adjusting that for inflation gets you to about $12.14, which is actually really close to what it costs you to get a current Ninja Turtle figure at $12. 1991, the next year, we had the two competing game systems. First off, the Super Nintendo. Now that was running about $200 at the time. Adjusting that for inflation gets you to about $471.07. And comparing that again to the Switch 2 at $500, that's actually pretty close. The Sega Genesis was running the same price, $200 a piece. Again, that adjusted for inflation is going to be at $471.07. And Sega doesn't have a system available at all anymore, so we'll just compare it still to the Switch 2 at that $500. 1992, Barney the Dinosaur had a lot of merchandise. The Barney doll was especially popular. Those are running for about $12 to $20. Adjusting that for inflation is $27.47 to about $45.78. Today, if you're going to get a Barney doll, again, there's a lot of different sizes and everything, but usually it's going to run you about $25. The Talk Boy, made popular from Home Alone 2, was $30 when it first came out. Adjusting that for inflation, it's $66.83. There's actually no version of this really available today because everything that this could do, people can do on their phones for free. So the novelty of it is still there. You can buy some of them on eBay, but when it comes to buying a brand new one at a store, you just can't do that. Pogs, however, are still available. Those, when they were really popular in 1993, were about $5 for a starter set with about 30 Pogs and 2 Slammers. Adjusting that for inflation, it's going to get you to $11.14. Nowadays, again, you can get Pogs for a huge range, but if you're looking for something similar to that starter set, it's going to be about $25. 1994, we had the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. The price on those original figures was about $7.49. Adjusting that for inflation gets you up to $16.25, which is really close to that $15 that people are paying for those today. Now, the secondary market on Beanie Babies did go crazy, but if you were just buying them at the store when they were popular back in the 90s, specifically 1995, they're running for about $5 a piece. Adjusting that for inflation, though, it's going to be $10.58, which is a little bit less than you pay for Beanie Babies nowadays, where if you're going to buy a new one, they're running for, on average, about $12.50. Scott Answers were big that same year. Those were selling for about $8 a piece. Adjusting that for inflation, it's $16.93. Nowadays, though, if you're going to buy one, sometimes those are up near about $30. Maybe the most famous popular Christmas toy of all time, Tickle Me Elmo, was selling in 1996 for $28.99. Adjusting that for inflation, you get to $59.37. Nowadays, if you're going to be buying a Tickle Me Elmo, which still does exist, those are running for about actually $40 a piece. The little electronic pet Tamagotchis were selling for $10 a piece in 1997 when they were hugely popular. Adjusting that for inflation, that gets you $20.14. Nowadays, you can get those for about $20, so really just kind of staying on pace with those ones. Another electronic pet was really popular, the Furby, in 1998. The original price on those was $35 a piece. Adjusting that for inflation gets you to $69.36. Nowadays, you can get a Furby for about $30, so that's even less than that original price. Pokemon were huge in 1999. We're going to talk about two different versions of that toy. First off, we're going to talk about Pokemon cards. A pack of those in 1999 would cost you about $2.99. Adjusting that for inflation gets you to $5.77. You actually pay a little bit less than that for a pack if you're just buying it at the store for $4.50 being that average. But the other way that people like to play Pokemon was the Game Boy. Now, the games cost $29.99 when they first came out. Adjusting that for inflation gets you to $57.88, which is just kind of right on par with what people pay for the newest Pokemon games, which now cost about $59.99. Though, most likely, the newest version is going to see a $10 price jump because that's just the direction video games are going. As we move into the year 2000, Razor scooters were really big. Those were going to run for about $100 a piece. Adjusting that for inflation gets you to $186.67. Nowadays, though, you can get Razor scooters for close to $40. I didn't realize that the original price was so high on these. I can understand more so than ever why I didn't get one. 2000 also saw the release of the PlayStation 2, with the original price on that one being about $299.99. Adjusting that for inflation gets you around $558.13, which keeps you real close to the newest PlayStation 5s, which are selling for about $550. The Bratz dolls, when they first came out, were selling for about $20 a piece. Adjusting that for inflation, $36.76 is where you're going to land. Nowadays, they're still selling for that original price of about $20. Beyblades in 2002, that original price on those was $7 a piece. Adjusting that for inflation, you're going to get to $12.57. And nowadays, of course, there is a wide variety, but you can get some Beyblades for as low as $10. In 2003, Dance Dance Revolution was huge, and you could get the game itself for about $40. The inflation on that would be about $70.49. And you actually can't get Dance Dance Revolution on any current systems that I can find, and so we don't really have a direct comparison there. RoboSapien was big in 2004, costing about $100 a piece. The inflation on that is $170.68. And nowadays, though the original version is not available, there are similar toys selling for about $50. As we roll into 2005, a few things we're going to want to mention here. First off, the Xbox 360. This was selling, depending on what version you were getting, for either $299.99, or if you're getting the more premium version with more storage, $399.99. Adjusting that for inflation, you get $495.11 and $660.15. Now, the newest version of the Xbox is selling for $650. So again, it's staying in range with that inflation. Guitar Hero also came out that year and was selling for $69.99. Adjusting that for inflation gets you up to $115.51. And just like Dance Dance Revolution, you actually can't play Guitar Hero on any current systems, which means they're not putting out new versions of it. 2005 also saw the Webkins, with those coming out originally at $10 a piece. Adjusting that for inflation gets you to $16.50. Nowadays, though, if you're going to be buying those, they can run you even up to about $30, $29.99. In 2006, the Wii was popular, selling for $249.99. Adjusting that for inflation gets you to $402.36, which is actually less than that Switch 2 is selling for today at $500. Now, the iPod Touch, depending on what version you were going to buy in 2007, could run you either $299.99 or $399.99. Adjusting that for inflation gets you up to $463.91 or $618.55. Now, the iPod Touch like this doesn't really exist anymore either, so we can't really compare a price on that one. The Bakugan toys sold originally in 2008 for between $5 and $10. Adjusting that for inflation, you got $7.72 and $15.45. Nowadays, you can still get them for around that $10. In 2009, Zuzu Pets were selling for $10 a piece. Adjusting that for inflation is going to get you to $15.04. Nowadays, you can get a brand new one, though, for about $12. The Mindflex games that were selling that same year were selling for about $100 a piece. Adjusting that for inflation gets you to $150.41. And they're no longer available, and so you can't compare price on a new one. Moving into 2010s, we hit the iPad. Here, there was a huge gap between what you could pay, depending on what model you were going to get. $499 all the way up to $829. Adjusting that for inflation, that goes between $739.47 all the way up to $1,228.49. Newest versions of the iPad that you can get, those are going to run you either between $350 and $999. In 2010, you could also get the Monster High dolls. Those are selling for $15, adjusting for inflation, and that gets you to $22.23, where you can get new versions of the dolls today for around $25. Silly Bands were big that same year. You can buy a package of those for about $2.50. Adjusting that for inflation, that gets you around $3.70, with you being able to get some today for around $4. In 2011, you can get the Skylanders starter set for $70. Adjusting that for inflation is going to be $100.75. Now, Skylanders are no longer a thing, so we can't compare them. Again, it's just kind of sad seeing some of these things that you just can't get anymore. The Lala Loopsy Silly Hair dolls were running for about $20 when they first came out, 2011. Adjusting that for inflation, you get $28.79. Nowadays, though, if you're going to be getting those harder to find, it's going to run you up about $50. The LeapPad Explorer was $99.99 in 2012. Adjusting that for inflation, you get $141.45. These are also no longer available. Another thing that's no longer available itself was the Wii U that same year. Those had a price range of between $299.99 and $349.99. Adjusting that for inflation, this can get you between $424.37 and $495.11, again running very closely to Nintendo's current system, the Switch 2. Techno the Robotic Puppy was $39.99 when it came out, adjusting that for inflation, $55.72. And though of course you can get robotic dogs all over the place, this specific brand, again, I wasn't able to find one available today. The 2014 Frozen craze brought us the Frozen dolls, running for about $20 a piece. Adjusting that for inflation just gets you to $27.66. Today, you can get Frozen dolls for as cheap as about $12. 2015 saw the Shopkins coming in. You can get packs of those for about $2.99. Adjusting those for inflation, it's about $4.11. Now, I'm sure that there are cheaper ones somewhere, but the ones I was seeing, the lowest I could find, about $20 a piece for the Shopkins now. So it could be a situation where they're secondhand and I'm not finding just actual stores selling them. But if that's true, man, that's quite the bump. 2016, we had Hatchimals with the price of $59.99. We're going to adjust that for inflation. That's going to get you up to $82.38. The newest versions of Hatchimals you can get, they're going to run you about $64, so staying below that inflation change. The LOL Surprise toys originally running for about $9.99 in 2017. And when you adjust those for inflation, it gets you to $13.16. Nowadays, though, you can get them for about $7. And the last one we're going to mention is 2018. We had the Fingerlings. The original price on these was $14.99. And adjusting for that and for inflation is going to get you to $19.38. You can go buy a brand new one, though, at a store for about $15 today. And this is where we're going to stop the list because you're noticing the inflation and the original prices are getting really close together. So we just kind of lose that comparison. Thank you so much for checking out this video. I hope you have a happy holiday. Don't forget to subscribe if you do like these videos. We'll see you next time.